Welcome. This is the Free Market Roadshow, probably the largest annual series of public conferences on economics. Remarkable experts are discussing the challenges and providing libertarian solutions to today's problems. Organized by the Austrian Economic Center in cooperation with select institutes, universities and think tanks, the Free Market Roadshow tours all over Europe. Today, we pay a visit to Kyiv.
Hello everyone, welcome to Kyiv. My name is Natalyia Melnyk. I'm the director of Bendukidze Free Market Center, a local partner of Free Market Roadshow in Ukraine. Bendukidze Free Market Center is an independent think tank founded in 2015 by friends and supporters of the great Georgian reformer Bendukidze. Since then, we have been working on unleashing Ukraine's economic potential through policy recommendations, research, educational programs that promote private initiative, responsibility, and equal rules for everyone. We have been proud members of the Free Market Roadshow family for 6 years now, and it has given us a great opportunity to combine local and international brain trust to be able to analyze and reflect on the most important issues within our society and the world in general.
Hello, my name is Federico Fernandez. Welcome to this edition of the Free Market Roadshow, the one corresponding to Kyiv. Let me tell you firstly a few words about the roadshow, why are we doing this, and why we are, let's say, here online in this case. The Free Market Roadshow, as its name makes it very clear, it's a touring event. Up until 2019, with the Free Market Roadshow, we visited more than 35, sometimes even more than 40 cities across Europe, the Caucasus, and Israel. There have been installments of the Free Market Roadshow also at the US and also in Latin America, and hopefully there will be some in the future. Due to to what we know, the pandemic, last year we had to do the event the online. It was not much of a road show, but well, and this year, at least in this part of this first half of the year, we're doing all the events online. We're doing them with such great partners as the Bendukidze Free Market Center based in Kyiv, amazing not only for Ukraine but for the whole of Europe. By the way, if you don't know who Bendukidze was, check him out. Great reformer and one of the key figures of the successful reforms in the Caucasic Republic of Georgia. So well, both to the Bendukidze Free Market Center, we really extend our thanks and we look forward to being in Kyiv again next year. The roadshow, the events will continue. Please check FMRS.digital to see which webinars we will be co-organizing with more than 40 partners across Europe and 100 partners in total globally. So please take a look. Tomorrow, by the way, there will be an event related to the European Resource Bank meeting and the presentation of the winners of the Dragon's Den competition. So also you can check that at europeanresourcebank.org. And well, last installment of propaganda. In November, we plan to have our Austrian Economics Conference in presence, physically offline in Vienna, 4th and 5th of November. So you can check that at austrianconference.org. But today we have a great panel to talk about regulations. and the lessons that we might have forgotten since 1989. Of course, 1989, the year in which probably the European Civil War finished, the wall fell, and well, there are still a couple of pockets, particularly in Europe, of authoritarianism. We have had some very nasty of those things a few days ago, but nevertheless, many things changed for the better. But it seems that maybe we have forgotten some of the lessons taught by the collapse of the Soviet Union. In any case, it would be great also that we not only talk about these challenges, but about the opportunities that for sure are for liberty and freedom in Europe and in the rest of the world. It's not necessary for classical liberals to be doing an autopsy all the time. I'm sure there are many things to be optimistic in spite of what has happened in the last 18 months or so. In any case, let me please introduce you our three great panelists that join me today, and also tell you a little bit of the methodology of this event. Firstly, how this is going to proceed. We have three panelists. They will be giving I don't know, can you see me? Sorry, my connection today, I have some technical problems. So I'll try to be very quick. Our great panelists are going to give an introductory statement for about minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. I'm going to introduce them very, very quickly, and then give the floor to our first speaker, who will be Georgiana. But very quickly, Georgiana, we are accompanied by Georgiana Constantin-Parke. She's originally from Romania, living in the US. She has a PhD in political sciences from the University of Bucharest. And she teaches for the Liberty University. You can check more about her work and everything she does on Facebook. We are also accompanied by Thomas Forgacz. He collaborates with the Ludwig von Mises Institute of the Czech Republic. He works in the crypto space and has spoken at multiple cryptocurrencies and libertarian events in Asia, Australia, and Europe. His personal website is forgacz.me. And last but definitely not least, Nils Karlson from Sweden. He's founding president and CEO of the Ratio Institute in Stockholm. He's an economist and a political scientist. He's an author and a university professor. You can find more about the great work that the Ratio Institute does at ratio.se. Without further delay, I leave the floor to Georgiana. Georgiana, you have your 7-8 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I'm an unexpected guest today, so I had a few minutes to think about this. Not really more than that. However, this is a topic that you really don't need that much to think about. In terms of what we've forgotten, I suppose, the consequences of regulation, especially where I come from in Romania, is that I think the biggest problem nowadays, looking at all of my country, is that you're left with a legacy of desire for more regulation. So you come from a communist state, and you've had the revolution, and you've had all of these horrible traumatic events in your life where you've been oppressed by the state. You were not able to practice your religion. But somehow the state manage to get into your head, manage to create almost a victim mentality to make you think, well, only the state can help you. You see this on the news all the time. They're even asking the private industries, right? People on the news are saying, well, you're having trouble with your company. What do you think that would be the right course of action right now? And they always answer, well, the state needs to subsidize. Well, the state needs to do this. The state needs to come and help me. When it's raining or it's snowing outside, they go around and they ask people, well, look how horrible it's horribly raining and it's horribly snowing and you're snowed in. What should you do? All of a sudden, it's not your responsibility to do that much anymore. Again, it's the state. The state needs to help. We now have a party in power who claims to be of classical liberal tradition, and that really, unfortunately, is almost the last thing that they are. I'm sorry to say it, but if you look at the way that the people in that particular party are behaving, and the things that they're trying to implement in society, and the things that they're advocating, especially now during the pandemic, it's all more state control. When I first saw that, I could barely believe it. I had their pamphlet. Are you not reading what your own party is supposed to stand for? So I guess the biggest hurt from so much regulation, the biggest hurt from state control is a legacy of desire for more state control. It's a legacy of broken independence, of broken self-esteem, and of this feeling that, well, of course it has to be the state to solve these issues. And unfortunately, in my state, in Romania right now, we have a really big problem with the rule of law, because most of the people in power are either part of what used to be the communist regime, or they are the legacy of the people who were part of the communist regime. They've raised their little minions, so to say, and now they've let them loose on the world. And it's, again, all about state power and state control. And you see issues like this in the United States too, but they have an excuse. They've never actually been oppressed by the state in such a way. And so you can kind of give them a pass in thinking, well, they're being tricked. They're on the verge of going there, but they haven't been there. It's not as if they actually would have learned their lesson from history. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like my country has really, learned that lesson. And it's scary to see young people talk about the desire for more state power, state control, state regulation, talking against freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, all types of freedoms. So yeah, I think that is the most toxic legacy that overregulation and state oppression can leave you with, which is a broken, it's almost like a toxic relationship. When you're a teenager and you find a boyfriend or a girlfriend and they start telling you, well, you're not very attractive, well, you're not very pretty. And then you have that legacy of a broken self-esteem that you have to carry with you for so long until you can shake the toxic effects of that relationship. This is exactly what's happened to Romania, and I'm sure that other countries will have these issues as well. I really hope that we can see these issues and let them go and move forward so that we can actually embrace freedom. So that was my introductory say. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Sorry for all the inconveniences today with the technical aspects. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Hello. Am I the next? Yeah, I'm so sorry. I accidentally closed my window the moment I was supposed to start speaking. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. So I wish I could. Tatiana, I hope I'm not mixing it up. Tatiana was a bit pessimistic in a way in her view, and I would say that she's even almost a bit optimistic, because she was referring to the legacy of the communist regime and the desire to regulate and for the states to step in. And I'm afraid that's not only the legacy of the communist regime, because we see currently, at least in the context of European Union, that same desire and tendency to come from the Western bureaucrats and governments who never experienced the Soviet style central planning, which of course, no questions, was much worse. But still, so we have these areas despite seeing the central planning failing miserably, huge chunks of the world, we see it now applied to more narrower, areas or smaller populations, and thinking that we might do it better this time. And we see that, in money, which is my favorite and in my opinion probably the biggest issue with the European Central Bank and their kind of sister smaller banks which only follow their policies, which creates unsustainable debt and creates redistribution mechanisms across the continent. It actually creates economic stagnation, and if you compare economic performance of countries who adopted euro before and after, you'll see a pretty striking difference there. So that's money. Then there's the central planning of markets and market relationship, where again in European Union you have small businesses who don't necessarily interact with businesses from other places in European Union, yet they have to follow the rules which apply as if they were, which was one of the main arguments for UK, for example, to leave. Because like 98% of their businesses didn't really interact outside of the UK, yet they had to follow all the rules, and also central planning of trade agreements. Slovakia, where I come from, or Czech Republic, where I lived for many years, had to scrap their trade agreements with some of their natural trading partners like Russia, like Ukraine, in order to join the EU. EU is now trying to force the same thing upon the Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia. And that results in a lot of problems and tragedies that we have seen in Ukraine. But the Russian part is not guilty of that too. And we're seeing central planning in competition, as bizarre as it sounds, with competition commissioner slapping massive fines of businesses whose only fault it is that they're successful or that they are using tax competition amongst different countries. They're predominantly tech giants, but others. And speaking of tech giants, we're seeing central planning in speech, increasingly, where now in at least Poland, maybe some more countries, now we are banning tech platforms from basically applying or using their own property by banning someone. Whether you agree or not, whether they should ban someone or not, it's still their platform. It should be their decision. And the next step to that is someone truly authoritarian coming in and using the law to prevent the tech platforms maybe doing the right thing by limiting their hateful reach and speech. Central planning in foreign policy, again in EU's context and Ukraine, with all the disastrous consequences. But we could talk about Middle East and so on. Subsidies, which are supposed to bring regions to more equal level, and they have exactly opposite effect, where the regions which were poorest when they were joining EU ended up with wider difference in their living standards compared to the more wealthy or to the most wealthy parts. So, but not to be only pessimistic and kind of laying out these problems. There are solutions, and I'm pretty optimistic about them. And kind of I see them in two streams or two terms. Political is radical decentralization. I think that's the only sustainable way. I can see it. I live in Zurich, in Switzerland, And I can see how political decentralization just makes things more sustainable, less authoritarian, less socialist. More focused or allowing the free market to thrive. And actually, we've seen in the pandemic over the past year, when central planning kicks in because the federal government of Switzerland took over many powers during the pandemic, what disastrous consequences that had. And people can't wait for those powers to be stripped down. Actually, there's a referendum about it in a month, I think, where hopefully those powers will be removed. So radical political decentralization, which pandemic, luckily, and that's the silver lining, in a way helps, because a lot of people, I can see that in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, are super skeptical now of their central governments, and so their municipalities and regional governments doing a slightly better job in responding to their needs. And finally, the second part of the solution is individual, exiting the system as much as possible. I spoke about money. It's my passion. I think it's the biggest issue of all, because it kind of allows everything else to happen. And by exiting the fiat money banking system through, call me biased, but cryptocurrencies, using decentralized finance, where the rails are only built for hopefully future mainstream applications, using payments via cryptocurrencies, all that stuff allows you to get closer to building your freedom for the future, and then finally maybe physical exits from place you don't find that particular free and attractive to a place like, well, Switzerland.
I guess it's me. Okay, can you hear me, everyone? Okay, perfect. Pleasure to be part of this panel. I've been working in the areas of regulations for many years, actually, in many different areas of society. And I think I can add a couple of aspects to the previous two excellent speakers here. When it comes to, communism and the Soviet system, I think that system is dead, We don't believe in central planning, Gosplan, all this. We don't believe in public ownership of productions. We don't believe in central planning, in the way they have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, and so on. But the belief in regulations, interventions into market, civil society, is still very much alive. And it's important here, I think, to make a distinction between rules and regulations. A free society, free market, civil society, constitutional democracy needs rules, of course. Private property rights, the rule of law, constitutional government, limited government, civil, political, economic rights of different kinds. That's the free society. Regulations, however, is a different thing from rules. And I guess many of you have read Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, and he dedicates that book, as you may remember, to socialists in all parties. And what he showed in that book, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is how, well, if communism was tyranny in big steps, regulations are tyranny in small steps. Regulations create these unintended consequences by disturbing the spontaneous orders of markets and civil society. If you take a regulation like protection of employment, they regulate this for benevolent reasons usually. Labor unions, individuals, voters, they want, security on the job, not to lose their jobs. That's natural. So these kinds of regulations are introduced, but as a consequence, markets work less well, less jobs are created, unemployment, especially for the youth, for the less competent, will increase. There will be less investments and so on and so forth. So in the end, it's really counterproductive. The security on the job market decreases. So this is the reason, for example, that Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, they have extremely high levels of youth unemployment. And the reason, the explanation for this is, of course, these regulations. And you can see this on rental markets, you can see it in all kinds of settings. And I think at the moment, what's really problematic is what's coming not only from the national governments, but also from the European Union. And I think especially this European Pillar of Social Rights, which has all these kinds of regulations that they want to introduce on a central European level, which will create all kinds of unexpected, unwanted, I think, in the end, social problems. So policy-caused social problems, that's the problem with regulations. But let me add just one other aspect of why this becomes very problematic. As I said from the beginning, many of those interventions, regulations are benevolent in the sense that, I think as the first speaker say, they believe that the state can create a good society. But the state cannot do that. A free society can create a good society, the great society, as Hayek said, And when you start having these interventions, these regulations, of course, you will see other groups coming in here, trying to use the state, the government, for their own more selfish purposes, non-benevolent purposes from the beginning. Special interests, big industries, private actors, bureaucracies. Well, I think in countries like Ukraine, Romania, corruption, of course, is a big problem. And corruption interacts with these regulations and make them harder to take away in the end as well. So you will get this process, self-enforcing process, where regulations create policy-caused social problems that legitimizes new interventions, which makes the special interests, the bad guys coming into the system, and making the state bigger and bigger. So that was the fear, of course, of von Mises, of Hayek, the Austrians who looked at this, trying to explain that there's a logic of interventionism that's really dangerous. So in the end, what can you do? Well, you have to recreate and defend these basic rules of a free society. The private property rights, of course, the rule of law, constitutional government, limited government, and these rights that individuals should have, both political rights, civil rights, and economic rights. In the end, that may create this decentralized vision that Thomas has, and I agree with that. But also that kind of society would need the rule of law. And that's the big challenge for us to create, I think. So I stop there. Happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Hello again. Happy to be here with you, hopefully for more than 30 seconds. Thank you all for your interventions. I would like to start, there are a couple of questions already. I would like to start with one of my own, just motivated from what Nils just said. And the question started with Nils, and if anyone else wants to intervene, please feel free. Do you think the ability, let's say, to get a limited government with a supranational organization like the European Union is becoming more and more complicated in Europe, and it's going to become, I mean, let's say maintaining a limited government in general is difficult, and with something supranational like the European Union centralizing so many decisions, do you think it's going to become even more complicated for member states?
I definitely think so. I've been a big fan of the European Union. Sweden joined it in 1995. And for us, it was a big benefit, actually. It strengthened the rule of law, the defense of private property rights, and so on. And that was very beneficial for the Swedish system, which was heavily dominated by the Social Democrats here in Sweden, and they didn't believe in rights at all of this kind. Private property rights, they didn't defend at all. So for us, joining the European Union strengthened the rule of law. It was very important. And both, to emphasize this, both economic and civil liberties, and these, I think, also political liberties in a sense. But since then, you've seen this process that I described, more regulations, creating a demand for further regulations, special interests coming in. And at the moment, I'm extremely worried, this recovery funds, they borrow money, they borrow our money, they spend our money, on things that is heavily influenced by all kinds of special interests and everything. So I've written a couple of books actually about the European Union, and I'm becoming increasingly critical. And to add an aspect to this, it's that may be interesting to this panel as well. I think in the end, many of these problems we see with the rise of populism and non-democratic kinds of movements, and not the least in Eastern Europe actually, is partly caused by these supranational interventions, regulations from the European level. So in the end, I think, the European Union is good if it sticks with these basic rules that a free society needs. If they would stick, to the rule of law and upholding the free market, I'm a big fan of it. But now they're moving in many other directions, which are very, very problematic. So this, I think, should be a major issue for us in the coming years, actually. To try to defend the good things, but to criticize of the tendencies that are growing stronger and stronger. That's my view.
Thank you. And Georgiana, there's a question and motivated by your first words, regarding this idea that the legacy of state control generates, this desire of more control. And Kai asks, if the consequence of more government action is greater desire for government action, then what is the way out of it? It sounds like it's a never-ever, it's like a never-ever cycle of despotism. Is there an exit?
Yes, I think, thank you for the question, Kai. I think that probably the only way out of something like this, because this comes from trauma. And I think it's been pointed out, accurately that you see this desire in the West as well. It's not necessarily just from the people that have been under the communist regime. And like I said, I think it's excusable in the West because they haven't felt the effects. So you can look at some of these ideas if you've never felt those effects. You don't have that in your history. You can think, well, that sounds interesting. Maybe they did it wrong. I can see that happening in a country that's never experienced that. But for a country that has, in my view, it's almost inexcusable to say that maybe we did it wrong. You were there. You were there and you lived it. I think that perhaps it's, again, similar to leaving a personal trauma behind, which is, first of all, you have to understand what happened. What is it that happened? You have to sit down and think about it. It's hard for people because this was their lives. They lived through those regimes, and they will have nostalgia that they will confuse with nostalgia for their youth and for the life that they lived that was a better life when they were younger. I mean, whose life isn't easier when they're younger in terms of physical health and all of that? And so I think you have to sit down. I think you have to think about what it was that really happened to your country in terms of economics, in terms of history, in terms of all of these things. But in order to do that, you would have to educate yourself. So you would have to look at the history before communism, and see what happened to that history when communism came. We never chose it. And there's talk in my country right now of changing our national day because, the 1st of December, our national day and celebration was something that came with the communist regime. But before that, we had the Day of the King, and it was something that at that point we enjoyed, and we felt a sense of national pride because we had that. We had the royal family. It was something to look up to, much like Great Britain has, a keeper of the past, so to say. A romantic notion that I think every country needs to kind of gather around so they can move forward with their national identity and pride in a good way, not in an exaggerated way. So I think education is the only way out. It's individual responsibility. It is sitting down and thinking about what happened and what is a good way forward. And then those educated people, I think, do have a responsibility to perhaps, so to say, infiltrate the government so they can change things. Because in Romania, just like our other colleagues mentioned, it's been a lot of corruption and it's still there. And that's a big problem because, yes, you absolutely need the government. You need those private property rights. You need that private citizen protection. You need protection from war. But if you have crony capitalism because a few people who are activating in the system have the ear of the government or have the pocket of the government, then there's no way out. It's only the educated people somehow making it, somehow breaking through. And I don't mean that you have to be, oh, I'm an educated person, I'm proud, and the peasant doesn't know what they're saying. I mean somebody who actually cares about whether or not it was a benevolent intention, like our friend mentioned, or it wasn't a benevolent intention. Whatever it was that the government did, you ultimately judge it by results. So when you go out there, you have to look at what the results were of all of those things. Early education, I would say. You have to start young. So yeah, that's my opinion. It's not an easy process.
May I comment on that? No, I think this belief in the state and the government is very strong in this country as well. I'm afraid now, Sweden. So it's something, parentalism. Buchanan called it once. I remember. It's not only paternalist, but many people want the father up there or mother that takes care of them. And so you can only fight this with ideas, I think, in the end, to explain what a free society is and what are the institutional prerequisites for a free society. And it's a long-term project. I mean, to get back to Thomas a little bit, I like Switzerland as well, but they fought civil wars, to create this. It took a long time for Switzerland to become this decentralized, free society. They were divided by Napoleon. They had civil wars. They were fighting about everything, languages, religion, whatever, In the end, they found an equilibrium there that is very stable. But it was a very, very long process to get there, And I think it's true for all societies. And we shouldn't be that pessimistic. I mean, if you take my little bit longer perspective from the 70s and 80s, everything improved, not only in Eastern Europe, but also Western Europe became a lot freer, Markets were regulated, banks were privatized, lots of good things happened. So we have this trend in the last 10 years or so when it's stabilized or falling, and again, economic freedom, democracy is decreasing in many parts of the world, but you can win that battle again. We did win it. Don't forget that.
Yes, thank you. Thomas was mentioned, and I want to give the floor to him. And there are a couple of questions specifically aimed at Thomas. I want to start with one that I think relates to what Georgiana and Nils were commenting as well. One vision of the cypherpunks is to have code take over the role of laws. This is potentially a revolution when it comes to state regulation, rendering it ineffective. What is your opinion about that?
How to say it? Both excited and skeptical at the same time, I'd say. I'm a huge believer in emergent law, in Bastiat/Hayekian tradition, if you will, or Rothbardian. This is something which is very, very difficult. I'd argue impossible to put into code. But the code can do certain things, and thanks to blockchain, thanks to cryptocurrencies, trustlessly, where if you think about it, first time in history, we can conduct trade of certain type, very specific type of, but assets, without having to trust anyone, not only any third party, but also the counterparty. We have it in the code where if the counterparty, where the third party doesn't need to be involved at all, and if the counterparty breaks the agreement of the basic, very simple agreement of the trade simply doesn't happen. There's no equivalent of me bashing you, over the head and stealing your cash in the middle of the trade. That doesn't happen. So this is, truly exciting, and the whole decentralized finance space is being built on top of it. Coming back to the previous topics, I actually very strongly disagree with the statement that we need the government. I think government is always and with no exception only a harmful entity, and we should strive to eliminate it in every single aspect of our life. I'm being realistic, and I know that's not going to happen, but I'm not the one picking the priority. Which aspect should that be? I say, strike it down all, just destroy it, burn it to the ground, and that's my baseline. And let the statists pick their middle ground of where they want to start, because to me it doesn't matter. Everywhere they will, start is a good place. Whether that's an army, defending from external invaders, which the governments are really, really bad at, or whether that's a social welfare state, or whether there's other kinds of drug war. Or, I don't care. Pick yours. As far as I'm concerned, strike all of them down, burn it to the ground.
Nils, did you want to add something?
Of course. I mean, states are stationary robbers. Don't forget that. I mean, there are other bad guys out there, and I think in this digitalized world with all these scale economies and network effects, we do face problems, from private actors as well. Not as bad as from states so far, but that's how the state came to be from the beginning. Some rich bad guys started to suppress us in various ways. So I think we have to be more constructive here. We really have to think about how to control the state, and what kinds of institutions, what kinds of institutional competition can we create, and otherwise things will go really bad, I'm sure. But I agree with it. Let's fight it with all we have, but we have to be a bit constructive as well. That's my view on this.
I just add that state is rich bad guys.
I agree with that.
Another, Thomas, if you could quickly, so we can move on to other questions. But there's another one quite interesting for you that refers to what the movements that the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist government, did last week. Its impact in the cryptocurrency markets, the cryptocurrency acceptance being barred by several Chinese authorities. The question is, do these things that happened in the last couple of days undermine the idea that cryptocurrencies are an effective way to protect ourselves against the actions of the government?
So I mean, I've been interested in Bitcoin for like 10 years now, and really heavily and almost full time in it for about 8 years. And this is probably 27th time I hear, about this and that government banning Bitcoin and that being end of cryptocurrencies, and how will that impact us. And I think the results and trends speak for themselves. I couldn't care less what the Chinese government thinks and do. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, at least the top 10 to 20 of them are those that are truly permissionless and distributed. Don't care about what Chinese or Ukrainian or other governments think about it. On a practical level, of course, the trouble comes for the actual people on the ground, at the gates, and that's something that I've been worried about from the very early on. that where the state really has true power and true means to make our lives more complicated are the gates between the fiat system and the crypto world, and that's why we need to push crypto to everyone, to mainstream adoption, make it maybe not universally in the foreseeable future, but at least very widely accepted medium of exchange as soon as possible. So, by the time they might try to attempt something very serious and very radical and on a global scale, then it'll be too late for them.
Thank you, Thomas. And I would like to, and in this, I want to invite the three of you. I want to come back to something that Nils mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's very interesting to discuss in this event, which is how can we be creative in fighting the excesses of the state? I think there are several reasons to be pessimistic, but I think there are way more reasons to be optimistic. I'll just mention a couple of developments that I think are very positive, not only for the present, but for the future. Cryptocurrencies and everything that is happening in that realm, I think it's extremely important. We are literally at the gates of denationalizing money, bringing money back in the hands of the people. The developments that we are seeing in education, I think, are amazing in many ways, not only because of technology, but also because of, let's say, some of the things that the pandemic itself provoked, which was the de facto legalization of homeschooling, basically all around the globe, which I think is quite positive. Even some instances of deregulation that we saw thanks to the pandemic, and please, I don't want to speak high of the pandemic. I think it's been horrible. I mean, the government reactions have been horrible, but we've seen a lot of deregulation, a lot of acceleration of processes due to the pandemic, and there are several more. So I would like and please, whoever wants to start, how do you see this? If you see any of these positive developments, where do you think we should put our attention, and where the battle for freedom can be won?
Can I start? I can start, okay. Yeah, but I think if you look through history, it's very clear that there are formative moments when political change is more possible than at other times. Industrializations, railroads, Atlantic sea crossings, whatever, so this is an opportunity. And the thing with these formative moments is that it can go both ways. That's the challenge, of course. And China is trying to take this opportunity, of course, to use this for oppressive purposes. Instead, these new technologies that are emerging, and through the pandemic, it's enormous change, I think, in lifestyle, in learning, and working, and so on, and maybe productivity and everything will increase here, in a couple of years. But that's when ideas are the most important, If you have bad ideas and you have these formative moments, either in a crisis or, through some other changes that goes on, it may become really bad instead, So I did a book on reforms in Sweden and Australia. Statecraft and Liberal Reforms in Modern Democracy is the name of the book. So you can find that on the net if you want. And I think in the end, it's about ideas. It's a battle of ideas, and to connect the good ideas to resources of different kinds. You have to have people or actors with resources behind you. And maybe that could be the advantage of the cryptocurrencies, Maybe enough resources to fight the state may emerge here in the future. That would be extremely interesting. As resources that are not controlled by the state actors, That would be very interesting. So that's my view. It can go both ways. We should take the opportunity.
Anyone else who would like to?
I can go on.
Yeah.
Please, Georgiana.
I think the technological developments have been great. I love that this work from home thing, especially here in the United States, has been pushed forward, because it wasn't really as much of an option before the pandemic as it is now. A lot of jobs are offering more flexibility with that. And I think that's wonderful. People choosing the way that they want to work, and companies realizing that they don't necessarily need people at the job at a certain place, saving money with that. Wonderful, wonderful things. I think that a way to maybe control the thirst for power of the state is, just back to two things: individual responsibility and education, where we have to be aware and we have to be awake. We have to make sure that if a regulation was put in place during the government crisis, we don't forget about it. We go back and remind it, hey, the crisis is over. This regulation needs to go. It's no longer applicable, right? We have to remember that. And then we have to educate. And I will never stop saying that. It starts really young. And the most important thing in this education is really, teaching our children. That's where the battle is, I think. It's in the future of our children. I see that here in the United States, just because I live here and I'm always connected to the news. But I also hear from Europe, the battle is the censorship of thought, the censorship of speech. These things are horrible that are taking place nowadays. They're beyond ridiculous. I mean, I was in the hospital a few days ago, and instead of calling me ma'am as they used to, they would call me friend, because they don't want to offend either partner, which I understand that. I get where they're at. I get the desire not to offend, but aren't we pushing this a little bit too much? Isn't this beyond ridiculous and dangerous? It's beyond ridiculous, but it is dangerous at this point. I think the best thing we can do is strive to make the idea of freedom and individual responsibility not scary. Because freedom is scary. And I hear this almost as a leitmotif everywhere around Facebook and social media, where adults, we millennials, are growing up, and all of a sudden they're saying, man, I wish my mom and dad were here to tell me what to do. And
Sure.
It's understandable for everybody growing up. We feel like that. All of a sudden, there's no higher authority. It's just us. And if it's just us, it can be scary, but this has to be educated in young children and teach them this is a wonderful thing. Because if you have a good basis and you know kind of what's good, what's bad, you know yourself, you understand the world, you can move freely and you can have a good life. This isn't scary. Scary is when you can't do things because the government tells you that you can't do things. And I think the stigma, I hear it everywhere, here, back in Romania, everywhere, of self-interest. Self-interest is a bad thing. How is it a bad thing? What if my self-interest is to rescue orphans? What if that is my interest, my most intimate desire? How is that a bad thing? So in whether you look at this from an evolutionary perspective, self-interest where you're helping others actually helps you survive. And if you're looking at this from a religious perspective, say Christian, because that's what I am and that's what I can talk about, God said, love your neighbor as thyself, which implies he not only knows you love yourself, but you must first love yourself in order to love your neighbor. So in terms of self-interest, we have to take that stigma away. It can be a good thing. If you're a jerk and a terrible person, it doesn't matter what the state makes you do. You're still going to be a jerk and a terrible person. So yes, I think, bottom line is we have to be aware, we have to be awake, and we have to educate our children in the tradition of non-scary freedom, I think.
Thank you, friend Georgiana. Comrade Thomas, would you like to add anything?
So Federico, you touched on it, and I completely agree with it. The shift, mental, if not super practical, into homeschooling, I think was fantastic. Result of this whole and sort of a silver lining of this pandemic. There was a tweet about a year ago that if you think things are bad now, imagine that the next generation of politicians will be raised by day drinking homeschoolers. And I couldn't help but think, That's great. I love that. The changes like these always bring new opportunities and give people a push to think about new, ways of making our lives better. That's what market does in the end. It gives us what we want, what we desire, and to make our lives better, at least subjectively, if you sometimes don't agree objectively. So I think this is the silver lining. And finally, politically, really a lot of people have woken up in how bad the governments are at managing through crises. I can see it in Slovakia. The whole decentralization movement has picked up pace and momentum and voice. As I said, here in Switzerland, there'll be shortly a referendum about stripping the federal government all these powers that they took and abused. And if we look in history, the arguably the greatest and possibly one of the most brutal empires of all time, which was the Mongolian Empire, collapsed after with a combination of inflation and pandemic, which sounds a lot like today. If all of these bad empires, or at least some of them, will collapse as a result of this, I think that's great news for all of us.
Thank you, Thomas. We are almost at the end, but and there are a couple of questions from the audience that unfortunately I won't be able to ask you. To wrap up the event, I would like to ask you, I'll modify a little bit one of the questions of the audience. Do you think, I want to talk, hopefully not of a brutal empire, but of the European Union. We'll see. But in any case, now seriously, would we be, the question is, even with all its flaws, would we be better off without the European Union, or it's still for its members, it's still a force for good in the end? And what would be the areas that you would like to be changed? What's, let's say, your general assessment about the European Union? Nils, if you want to start.
Okay. I'm still in favor of the European Union. We should remember the history of Europe. We've been killing each other on this continent for many years, and we had dictatorships, in Portugal, Spain, Greece in modern times. I think the European Union has been very beneficial for economic liberties in general, in many countries. We have an open market that's bigger than the US market, for example. 500 million people on the market, that's not bad, including Norway and some Switzerland and some other countries, So the four freedoms are extremely important, and we should focus on that. We should forget about all these social rights and stuff like this. We shouldn't let them borrow money. It's a very dangerous combination with this, further integration of Europe that is built into the constitutions or the agreements, the basic agreements of the European Union. So we have to change that, and that's a hard thing, of course, Thomas. If you want to change the state, the government, the European Union, but we have to try to do this, and I'm in favor of something I call pluralistic federalism. So on the federal level, you should have the basic classical liberal view of what a limited government should do. That should be done by the European Union. For the rest, they shouldn't be there. For the rest, you should have institutional competition. If the Czechs or the Slovakians want to decentralize and get rid of government, fine. But they have to stick to the rule of law and these economic freedoms and these democratic freedoms as well, with that, civil freedoms. So that would be my view of what we should do. So Switzerland, in a sense, is a bit of an ideal, actually. It's not, they have some things on the central level, but it's not very much. It's very decentralized. They have, referenda and all kinds of systems to block centralization. It's a very interesting system, but it takes a long time to create, and it's going to be a lot harder to do it on the European level than to do it in a single country. So maybe the Slovakians, I don't know which example you have, Thomas, but if they could set an example to the rest, we could copy it. I have my doubts.
Thomas?
Yes. So no. No. There's no benefit of European Union. I think couldn't disagree more again. The correlation is not causation when it comes to peace on European continent. I would argue a European Union was formed long after the free trade agreements, which it's free trade that keeps countries and peoples peaceful. I lived in Singapore, which is surrounded by not very friendly countries and ideologies. Yet it's been peaceful with them because it has free trade agreements with them. Because all these countries and their elites, they have their employers, employees, businesses, investments, corrupted money hidden. I don't care. They have these relationships which make their relationship inherently peaceful. You could say the same thing about Switzerland and Liechtenstein, who successfully survived Hitler, thanks to some of these things as well. So in the end, it's free market and trade that maintains peace. It's not political unions, and I don't think you can choose either or. In European Union, whether you can choose for it to exist but not abuse its existence. When someone is 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away from you, it's only natural that they will abuse their power. That's very different if they are just down the street or in next city. I'm not excited or a fan of government of Zurich or Zurich Canton either. They're a bunch of socialists and red green eco terrorists, but they know if they screw up too much, it takes people half an hour to move to different canton with completely different tax structure and incentives and everything. So that keeps them in check. And this is something that European Union doesn't really have to worry about. 500 million people will not simply pick up and move to a different continent. Hence, their very existence is, in my opinion, bad and damaging.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Georgiana.
I'm somewhere in between, although that was definitely a good perspective there. I think as long as you'll have people and as long as you'll have a state, there'll be potential for aggression. Absolutely. I don't want to see the state completely abolished. I think there are some good things that it does over there. I understand the social contract as beneficial in general, as long as it's well maintained. Switzerland actually has a system close to the United States, and it's managed to do it so much better than the United States because it's so small, which is a very good point that Thomas made as well. But for me, I think the benefit of the European Union would be more economic collaboration. I like that about it. I love that about it. Initially, I was a great fan of the European Union. And the whole idea that, initially I was very young and I also thought political union was a good idea, and then I changed my mind about that. But the economic union has to me, great potential. If done right, I think it has great potential. What I think it should do, though, is slow down on the desire for political union and the aggressiveness of trying to take over people's lives in that way. I mean, for my country, it's introducing problems we're not even ready to talk about. We've never even had conversations of the type that the EU is trying to introduce. And because we're so used to somebody up there telling us what to do, we're ready to listen, and that is not okay. We need conversation. We need civil society. We need to discuss if we're even ready to adopt such issues. You're talking about all of these crazy conversations on an international level, starting from God knows, euthanasia to gender fluidity to all those things. we're not there culturally. You have to wait until we get there. And so I think the EU needs to stop its political aggression. It needs to stop its desire for political authoritarianism. It needs to simply do away with that and just try to focus on the benefits of economic collaboration, because I think it can, in fact, do a really good job. I think it's kind of screwing that up a little bit too with political and fiscal ways, but I think it has potential. I still do believe in that, and I would love to see a stronger political collaboration and no more of a political attempt to get them to be under one big government, because that's why Switzerland's doing great and America's not anymore in terms of that. That's why America has these problems. It had the checks and balances, it had everything, but it's so big. And the state has pushed so much that a lot of their freedoms are slipping away from them and they don't even know it. And I'm here in the middle of it. Not fun. So, yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you very much, Georgiana, and thanks to the three of you. It was an honor for me to share this panel with you. Again, apologies for my technical issues at the beginning. Please don't forget to follow Georgiana on Facebook, Georgiana Constantin-Parke. She's quite active there. Tomasz at forgach.me and Nils at the magnificent Ratio Institute of Stockholm at ratio.se. There's an event, there are several upcoming events of the Free Market Roadshow. The next one is the one corresponding to Bratislava with Ines. You can enroll, check timetables, dates, etc. at fmrs.digital. And I hope to see you soon in the next Free Market Roadshow event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.